Hey guys, Suzanne Light back here with another lesson from 1 Samuel. Can you believe we're actually on session 8? Wow. Let me write that down here so I don't forget, because sometimes when I go back and I'm editing, I'm like, really? We're only on chapter 5, but we're on session 8. So that's not too bad. Three extra sessions to cover. Well, no, we haven't covered chapter 5 yet, but you can listen to anybody read the Bible, but you want to be taught the Bible. So that's what I'm doing. I'm taking my time explaining this to you. If you are just coming up on this, just stop, go back, go to the 1 Samuel playlist and start at the beginning. A lot of you have not gotten past lesson 1 or 2 yet, and that's okay because you take your time. I suggest taking notes with this because there's a lot in it. And so take your time with it. You know, I'm taking my time studying, although I got to get some more studied and printed because I'm getting caught up on some things. When we finished, Eli, his 2 sons had died. The Ark of the Covenant has been captured by the Philistines, and that's where we're going to pick up, and we're going to talk about what a treat they thought they had gotten, and we're going to realize how terrible it was for them to take it away from the Israelites. Let's start 1 Samuel. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, so it may be a little different from what you're reading from. Should be about the same. It will be the same message, but I am reading from the New Living Translation. So, the Ark and Philistine, chapter 5, verse 1. After the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. Now, you would have thought that the next news written here would have been about the strategies and the plans that the Israelites had to go and to get the ark back from the Philistines, but that is never mentioned. To go back with the bring it back or die attitude, because it was such a sacred thing for Israel. Not mentioned. There was no zeal, there was no courage to do that. And there wasn't because they had done it in the flesh. They didn't have God on their side. He was not promoting them to take the Ark of the Covenant like a good luck charm into battle. They had lost 30,000 men. They were whooped, as we say here in the South. That's when it's not whipped, but they were whooped. But they kind of had the attitude, basically, it's gone, just let it be. Horrible attitude. Just, you know, everything they did preceding all of this happening was wrong. And it caught up with them. And we can get that way. We can get so deep in stuff that you just think there is no hope. Well, there's always hope with Jesus Christ. If they had gone right then and repented to God and said, show us how to get this back. Lord, what is your plan? God would have provided a plan. And there's times in our lives when we can mess up so bad. Oh, we can mess up. I mean, people can mess up so bad. And there's a lot of circumstances that go along with messing up really bad. But even in the midst of that, we can go and say, God, I have messed up so bad. I realize there may be circumstances, but I need your help. I need your guidance. I need your wisdom. If they had done this, if they'd done it from the very beginning, just ifs. And don't let your life be a bunch of ifs. If I hadn't have done this. Oh, if I had done this. There comes a time when you have to take your own self and say, I'm not messing up anymore. It's time for me to get my life in order. And you may say, well, I don't ever do anything really bad. That can be from big things to even little things. You know, just saying, I just want my life in order. I just want God to be in control. Because when God's in control, there's no limit to what he can do for us. There truly is not. We limit him. But there is no limit to what he wants to do for us and what he will do for us. So, there was no plan to get the Ark of the Covenant back. You would have thought it would have opened up the next chapter saying, how the Israelites fell on their knees in repentance unto God, and they were whooped. They were whooped. They just said, it's gone. There's nothing we can do. So you know what? There again, God had to take the plan into his own hands. Take the work. He had to plead his own case for the ark of God. He had to take control of it, since men would not even appear before him in repentance for what they had done. Had to be a very disappointing time. It's very interesting about what they did with the ark. Let's look at verse 2. They carried the ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. Okay, so they remember the picture of the Ark of the Covenant, and they have this big idol, this big, probably a big statue of Dagon. Now, Dagon was the chief god of the Philistines, okay, whom they believed sent rain and that he always assured a bountiful harvest. That's what they believed. But like a lot of their pagan neighbors, the Philistines had a lot of gods that they worshipped. So Dagon was not only, he was their chief god, is what he was. They felt like the more gods they had on their side, the better off they were. Oh man. One God. One God. That's why they wanted the ark, see? They thought that if it had helped the Israelites in the past, that surely it would help them. Foolish thinking leads to foolish decisions, leads to foolish outcomes, okay? But now they put the Ark of the Covenant in there with Dagon, but when the people living nearby began to get sick and die, the Philistines realized the ark was not a good omen after all. It was actually a source of greater power that they had never seen before. Power that they couldn't control. We know Dagon and all the other Baal and all that, they were just images that they worship. We serve the only true God. There's no other man that anyone has ever worshipped that has ever been resurrected from the dead. It's not. So God's already punished Israel for taking the Ark of the Covenant into battle and using it. He allowed 30,000 men to be killed, the 2 priests to be killed. Eli died of it. Eli's daughter-in-law died as a part of it. Just sinful effects. So he had already dealt with them, with a lot of that. He will deal now with those that abuse it, and he will fetch it out of their hands again. And when I was reading this and studying back over it, what they did, they took the most precious thing to God and they turned it over to the enemy, and they abused it and they lost it and took it away from God. And I think about how precious our lives are. We are the most precious things to God. And sometimes we take over that control that he should have over us, and we turn ourselves over to sin, which is captivity. Same thing as being captured by the Philistines. And our lives are so precious that when we take the control away from God, it puts us into captivity. And how sad that must be to God. Be standing there and we are so far away from him, or a person can be so far away from him that they don't even look to God to say, I am yours, you are mine, you know, control my life, let me live for you. So it's a lot like that, I think, came to my mind, that when God loses control of his people, it probably is in some sense like losing control of the Ark of the Covenant, because it was because of the preciousness to God. My theology there, it doesn't say that at all. Verse 3. But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, when they go in to see the Ark of the Covenant, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the Ark of the Lord. I love that. Even a stupid stone idol falls in reverence to the Ark of the Covenant. I love it. So they took Dagon and put him in his place again. So they go and they stand him back up. You know, they're going, how did this happen? Next, verse 4. But the next morning, the same thing happened. Who is God? Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. But this time, his head and his hands had been broken off. The brain, the hands to do, and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of the body was left intact. Wow. The ark triumphed over Dagon, their foolish idol. He was made to fall over and over before it. And when someone falls down prostrate before someone and worships, it is a form of worship. And that's what the idol was having to do. He was having to fall down in honor of the ark. God will be worshiped. There will be no other gods before him. They will not stand before our God. God triumphs over Dagon in his own temple. I love it. He triumphs over sin. It says, Dagon, by falling prostrate before the ark of God, was a posture of adoration. I love that. A posture as adoration. Did as if it was to direct his worshipers to pay their homage to the God of Israel as greater than all gods. So Dagon was actually saying, this is what you need to do. But Dagon was an idol god. He was unworthy to be prayed to or trusted. There was no power there. He lost his head in his hands, which is symbolic that he proved utterly destitute both of wisdom and power, and forever disabled either to advise or act for his worshipers. That's powerful, guys. That even an idol statue had to bow before the ark of God. That just shows you that our God reigns. He was just showing his power and authority, and actually he was using it in a form so that Dagon was saying to the Philistines, if I do this, you need to do this. But they didn't. Verse 5. That is why to this day, neither the priest of Dagon nor anyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod will step on its threshold. Because it said that he, back in that verse, it said only the trunk of his body was left intact. His head and hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Now, when it says, this is why to this day, probably the probably the recording of this story was written later for 1 Samuel. So that's probably the reason it says, this is why to this day, neither the priest of Dagon nor anyone who enters the temple in Ashdod will step on its threshold. So one would have thought that this was proof of the ark's victory over Dagon and would convince the Philistines of their folly in worshiping such a senseless idol. But instead of being reformed, they were actually hardened in their idolatry. And 2 Timothy 3:13 says, but instead of being reformed, they were hardened in their idolatry, and as evil men and seducers became worse and worse. So it's saying that is what happened to them after this. So we're not told if they could actually repair the broken image. It's probable at this point that their focus became to getting the ark out of there, to take it away. And then they may have patched up Dagon after that. Verse 6 says, then the Lord's heavy hand, remember that, the Lord's heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod and the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. So why did God punish the Philistines? Well, they had carried the ark out of battle as a trophy of war, and they had put it into their temple of their pagan god. God's holiness could not allow such blasphemy. Could not. And I look at things today, how God is blasphemed, and sometimes I wonder how the world keeps on going. Because of mercy and grace, He's holding on as late as he can to coming back to get his saints so that more and more people will accept Christ. During the night, God knocked over Dagon. Without a doubt. He knocked him over. He just probably went, or he might even thought, fall down. You know, he didn't have to touch him. He didn't have to do anything because he's God. He knocked it down. He disabled it. And he inflicted tumors upon the Philistines. God powerfully demonstrated his supremacy in this. They should have seen that. They should have seen this. They should have been amazed at God. But the Bible says they hardened their heart even more. Don't reject what God does in your life. Oh, don't take it for granted. Don't take it for granted when he's speaking to you and telling you, no, 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 no. Don't do it. Listen. Do not harden your heart. Ask the Lord to soften your heart to his voice. I do that. Lord, don't ever let you be speaking to me and me not hear it. Or just to, just to bypass it. When you speak to me, I want to hear your voice. I want to do, what you want me to do. In that verse, it says the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them. So he started severely chastising them for what they had done. Verse 7 says, when the people realized what was happening, they cried out, we can't keep the ark of the God of Israel here any longer. He is against us. We will all be destroyed along with Dagon, our God. So they knew. They knew he was the supreme God. They knew he was all powerful. So although the Philistines had just witnessed a great victory by Israel's God over their own God, Dagon, they didn't act upon that knowledge until they were inflicted with tumors. Now, different commentaries says it could be in the bubonic plague. Another commentary said it could have been severe hemorrhoids, but it was some kind of tumors that came out of the body. And even today we'll say, well, man, they were so stupid. But today, even men today can see biblical truths, hear biblical truths. We have access to so much of the word now. You turn on YouTube, you turn on live streams, you go to podcast, and people still want to tune out biblical truths. Many times until they experience pain. And then when they experience pain, they want God to help. They want for God to step in. I remember when 9/11 happened. I was actually a little late for work that morning, and I actually saw live the second plane go into the Twin Towers. And most horrible day. Our nation was rocked. We'd never seen anything like that. And it was amazing how then, and of course things are so much worse now, but the nation was called to prayer. Everybody wanted God to take care and to heal and all this. The senators and the congressmen were on the steps of the Capitol praying for this nation. So we want him during calamity, and then we want to push him aside and walk without him during the good times. And that is a slap in the face of God. This nation was devised as one nation under God. He will always be the God of this nation. Verse 8 says, so they called together the rulers of the Philistines' towns. There were several towns. I think there was like 5 different towns. And asked them, what should we do with the ark of the God of Israel? The rulers discussed it and said, move it to the town of Gath. So take it away from here, move it to Gath. So they moved the ark of God of Israel to Gath. It was actually taken to 3 of these capital cities. I think there was 5 capital cities in all. Verse 9, but when the ark arrived at Gath, the Lord's heavy hand, once again, fell on its men, young and old. He struck them with a plague of tumors, and there was great panic. So they sent the ark of God to the town of Ekron. But when the people of Ekron saw it coming, they cried out, they are bringing the ark of God of Israel here to kill us too. So they were all weary, where they thought they were in triumph, and they were celebrating when they took the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, now they're weary of it and they want gone of it. Where the Israelites would have been happy to receive it back, even though they didn't work to get it back, the Philistines did not trust, worship, or believe in the God of Israel. So to them, it was very unwelcome, and it was bringing death to them. Absolute death to their people. God don't play. God don't play. He wasn't playing with them about this. Verse 11 said, the people summoned the Philistine rulers again and begged them, please send the ark of God of Israel back to its own country, or it will kill us all. For the deadly plague from God had already begun, and great fear was sweeping across the town. So the General Assembly, they called them all together and said, take the ark back to its place. Okay, I've had to stop because I've tickled my own self. There will be a blooper at the end of this. Oh, me. Oh, me. Me and my words sometimes. So this is not a funny part. This is very serious, but I crack my own self up sometimes. So that's good. So many were dropping dead among them. And many, many more were raging ill of the tumors that were coming up on their bodies. So their triumph in the captivity of the ark soon turned into lamentations. And they were eager to quit it and to let go of it and never to seize it again. Those that fight against God's will soon will have enough of it. And first or last will be made to know that none ever harden their hearts against him. None will ever prosper. You know, there comes a time when you say, man, I should have done this. I should have done that. They're saying, man, I wish we'd never gotten that ark. This was serious. People were just dropping dead. People were terribly, terribly ill with these tumors that they were covered in. Verse 12 said, those who didn't die were afflicted with tumors, and the cry from the town rose to heaven. They had boasted of the great slaughter of the 30,000 men. They had victory, they thought, in that. But now they were saying, oh, it was not a victory after all. Take this thing away. Get it away from us. But God lets them know that even though he didn't see fit to let Israel sword went against them with the 30,000 they had died, and to allow the Ark of the Covenant. You know, because you got to realize, guys, God's sitting on the throne. He could have pointed the finger. He could have zapped them all. I mean, that's just the way it is. He allows things to happen. He allows people to make mistakes, but he also allows you to come back. So he's not a God that sits up there and zaps people. People say, well, why did God let this happen? We live in a sinful world. Things happen. But God was going to let them know, even though he didn't let Israel win against them, he still was in charge. He was still in control. He had a sword of his own. He didn't need Israel's sword to defeat the Philistines. So we're going to stop here. We actually covered a whole chapter. Chapter 5. When we come back, we're going to talk about the return of the Ark of the Covenant. So, yeah, I got tickled at my own self right in the middle of teaching a very serious thing, but you know, laughter is from God. And I get tickled at my own self sometimes. So, yeah, there'll probably be a blooper at the end of this. So anyway, keep watching, guys. The history of this is so rich. It's so important. And we can see how God's hand moves in it all. So when we come back, we'll be starting with chapter 6. I love you guys. Remember, John 10:10 says that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but God said, I've come that you can have life and have it more abundantly. Let's go to the blooper. Bye. Many were dropping dead just among it. Many were raging ill of the tumors. 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 I sound like, what's his name? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Is it a tumor? Okay. 3, 2, 1.